those who don't know, you took over the role of George McFly from Crispin Glover in Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3. What was the process of getting that role like?
The process was odd. It wasn't like other films that I've auditioned for. You know, I knew I had to cry on cue for my audition for Pale Rider for Clint Eastwood. I knew, what I was going into when I auditioned for the lead in War Games or support roles in other films. Whereas with this one, it was kind of a secret or mystery. I had to figure it out along the way because I was originally contacted by a gentleman, an agent who handled lookalikes. He, in fact, represented Kevin Holloway, who was Michael J. Fox's photo double. And he called me one day asking if I knew who Crispin Glover was. And I was like, sure. I did a film with him at the American Film Institute in '83 before he got George McFly. And then I liked his acting when we worked on that, and I exchanged phone numbers and such. And the agent asked me if I knew if I was the same height and weight. And I said, no, he's taller, I think, than me and heavier. But what is it? I need the work. And he was not at privilege to say what the project was. And I, had read already in the trades that Paradox, which was Back to the Future 2 and 3 as one script, was in pre-production. And I said, get me in there. I could use the work. And I went and met with the assistant directors, David McGiffert. Who was the other one? Can't remember. But nonetheless, this was '88. And that meeting went well. I gave them my resume and told them, I've been on very big sets. Pale Rider was the highest grossing Western of the 1980s. And I think that was I want to say it was a $30 million budget. Though Back to the Future 2 and 3 Paradox was a $40 million budget. And, the studio almost pulled the plug on it because they kept asking for more and more money. And that's when they decided they would ask for $1 million more and give them 2 films. That's kind of how the evolution of Part 2 and 3 came about. But I digress, which I'm known to do. So stop me if you want. So I then was sent to casting after meeting with the assistant directors. Casting director had me read the Hanging the Laundry from the first movie, George and Marty. And that went well. And then I started being sent to wig maker, prosthetic mold for makeup, makeup design Ken Chase, and body cast fitting for a special effect. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. I guess they're going to need George at multiple places at the same time, because I had heard that, you're going to have the challenge of Marty being in 2 Martys in the same scene. So I even called Crispin at this point and left him a message that asking, hey, remember me? We met on the film with Dan O'Hurley way back. And in fact, in '85, when Back to the Future came out, I called Crispin to congratulate him because I wanted to see what the summer competition was for Pale Rider. And of course, it was Back to the Future, and thought he was fantastic in it, and told him so. I said, say a good word for me. I need the work. And I never heard from him until Part 3 came out. Actually, I'd read shortly after I screen tested in the young George makeup for Dean Cundy and Robert Zemeckis. And I had read that Crispin was not going to be returning to do the role, that he had a conflict with another film shoot schedule, which I couldn't fathom how they were going to. And it was my makeup guy, Ken Chase, who said, you're going to be George. Crispin's out. I was like, what? And sure enough, a couple days later, casting called offering my agent at, 6 o'clock in the evening on a Friday, me the role at very low terms. It was kind of funky. But they accepted the work for me, and And I actually negotiated the billing, the title card shared with James Tolkien, Principal Strickland, because my agent had dropped the ball on that. I negotiated that with Bob Robert Zemeckis, who was gracious enough to give that to me. So it was an odd casting, and as things came out, I learned that it wasn't a case where Crispin had a conflict with another film shoot. Maybe he did. But while we were shooting, Spielberg came up to me and said, "So, Crispin, I see you got your $1 million after all." And that is what told me that Crispin was holding out for $1 million. And later on, I've learned that he wanted script approval and various other things. And like I said, when part 3 came out, he called me and said, "It's not fair what happened." I said, "Tell me what happened." He said, "They used my life mask in your makeups, especially the young George, 17-year-old, for the Enchantment Under the Sea dance and Fighting with Biff reenactments. And I didn't give them permission, and there was no monetary agreement." I said, "That's not fair." So it had taken me quite a bit of time. Generally, when you request photos of your work in films from studios, it takes a couple of weeks to get your photos so you can promote. But this took 6 months, which was very odd. I knew there was something up. And when Crispin told me this, I felt that it was morally not right that the studio would use his life mask without his permission. I had played Stanley Laurel, Charlie Chaplin, and Groucho Marx at Universal Studios on the tours, and they always paid licensing for use of those characters' likeness. And for the studio not to have done that, I said to Crispin, "Here, take my photos and here's my stories," and he ran with them to get his out of court settlement for $750,000 plus.
The franchise had already recasted Claudia Wells when she was unable to continue playing the role with Elizabeth Shue, and it's not like they looked identical in any way, shape, or form. So it's kind of strange that they didn't let you look more like yourself and just have it be an out-and-out recasting instead of the very secretive nature that they seem to have gone about it. And the fact that for the work that you did, a lot of people still assume, as that was part of Crispin's lawsuit, that is Crispin doing the work, and you're not getting the credit for your role in the latter films.
This is true. It was odd, and I think I know why they did what they did for what you say. The fight, the recreation of the kiss on the dance floor, the fight with Biff in the parking lot of the high school, they needed the audience to believe that you were still there in those same scenes. And I think that very much was the reason that they, went with the prosthetic makeup. And, they kept me in the background or out of focus in those scenes or over my shoulder to give the illusion that it was still Crispin, or that it was, the same George, as you can see in this shot. And the makeup full on did not look great, but the profile was definitely based on Crispin's life mask, you can tell. And I think the studio decided, to let Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, pull this, whatever they were doing, and deal with it later, because they had been in pre-production for so long and had everything ready to go. And Crispin was waiting. They were, I think, fighting it out, butting heads until the 11th hour. And I think I was, their insurance, because I had been an expert at recreating characters. Right now, I'm sporting this mustache because I have a gig this weekend as Mark Twain. And I take great care in trying to get the nuances of Stanley Laurel when I play Stan Laurel, Laurel and Hardy, or Charlie Chaplin, or Groucho Marx, Larry Fine of Three Stooges. I, as Twain, have gone back and found, William Gillette doing an imitation of how Twain actually sounded, because he was neighbors of Mark Twain, of Sam Clemens. And because I want to, do justice to the idea that these characters live on, through the performance. And so I found, first of all, Bob Gale and Zemeckis gave me all these unreleased screen tests that Tom Wilson and Leah and Crispin had done, so I could study more of his mannerisms and placement of his voice and so on and so forth, which I did. So when you see me go, "Hey, you, get your damn head," "Are you okay?" Those lines are actually me. They're not Crispin. And then as old George hanging upside down in 2015, I try to do the placement of the voice. I still try to do the placement of his gravity, which is, he kind of leans forward. His gravity's coming out like this. He does a lot with his hands, because I worked with him on the film with Dan O'Hurley. I was able to watch his work. I thought he was fascinating. And I want to do justice to Crispin. When you see the pizza, here I am in that body cast that I mentioned, that actually has a pole going out of the back of it. The costume went on over the body cast and the pole. And when the pizza comes out, Lorraine says, "George, rotate your axis for pizza. It's bad for your digestion to eat upside down." So I do my best Crispin with a golf swing going "4" and his choking laugh, which, it's in the deleted bonus material, but it was me trying to do a tribute to what Crispin had laid down. And it's odd being in the situation that I was in, and also the studio tried to keep me quiet. And Bob Gale offered me a part without the makeup in part 3 as a cowboy or something, but it never materialized. It was a weird position to be in, because they were obviously stuck between a rock and a hard place in negotiations, and Crispin was stuck between a rock and a hard place because he didn't like the way he was treated on the first film. The George hanging upside down is something of a bit of a, how shall I say, it's an urban legend of why he was hanging upside down. Apparently, on the first film, Crispin, he's a very intense actor. He would either under or over his marks for camera. You have marks on the ground, so you're in frame or in focus, and he wouldn't always hit them, which was very frustrating, I'm sure, for production, for the crew and director. So the Bobs wrote that George had his back go out playing squash in one version, or a flying car fell out of the sky on the golf course and he wrenched his back. And so he was in this ortholev of the future. And that way, because the rails for the ortholev went from outside the front door all the way through the living room and into the kitchen, they had control of Crispin's movements. So it was always meant for Crispin to control his movements, not because there was a different actor playing the role, which has become kind of the urban legend that I'm here to set straight.
Well, that is really interesting to know. And I mean, you did mention that scene, and that dinner scene is probably your biggest chance to work with the great Michael J. Fox. And though it is a very short scene in the film itself, I've obviously seen the deleted scene you're speaking about. What was it like getting to work with him, not just in that scene, but he's playing 3 different characters?
Well, it was really cool. It was really an honor and exciting to be on that set. I had the first work we did was in the young George makeup, and that kind of threw everyone off who were expecting Crispin. And then they saw me in the makeup that looked odd, especially up close. I remember Mike being very uncomfortable and Leah being uncomfortable, and Zemeckis still referring to me as Crispin. But by the end of the first week, we were getting along great. They saw that the work at hand was being done. We all worked very hard to recreate those scenes accurately. And then when we moved into the soundstage to shoot the 2015 work, as you can see, the photo I just had up, that was the VistaVision VistaGlide camera that spliced the film inside the camera. Very cutting edge technology that had only worked before on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I believe. And the Tondro computer program that ran the dolly on the track that the camera was on. And to get those scenes where Mike is playing Marlene, Marty Jr., and Marty Sr., it took many, many long hours, days. In that, first of all, we only had Mike on evenings and weekends because he was doing the last season of Family Ties during the day. And he would have probably generally about 3 hours for each character change. Once we set the blocking of the scene, say passing the iced tea at that dinner table, we couldn't really vary from it. And we'd shoot, say, first with Marty Sr., and then Mike would go change into Marty Jr., and then after getting that down, those movements, he'd go change into Marlene, and she would work, and then hopefully we would wrap. That week, I remember doing just that scene alone. We had a 19-hour, a 21-hour, and a 26-hour long day. And I remember asking Mike, I said, when do you sleep? And he said, basically in the limo in between the studios. Yeah, he's a great guy, though. You see Mike kind of deteriorating over the years because of his PD, but he has remained his vital self. Mike's a funny, smart man, and it's all still there. That's recently in Dallas, we got to jump in and get a shot with Chris and Mike. Before Dallas, in New Orleans, at one of the 40th anniversary reunions of the cast of the trilogy, I was just wanting to congratulate Mike because he had received the Medal of Freedom from President Biden. And he was being wheeled after his panel by me. And I said, "Congratulations, Mike, on your Medal of Freedom." He reached out and grabbed me and said, "I feel like a teenager. I want to go out to the parking lot and drink a beer and dance naked." I was like, yes.
I love that that's
I'm
still
with
there.
you. Let's do it. So proud of him, in the face of this unrelenting disease. His meds allow him for a little while to kind of maintain, and then things fall apart again. He's got to go through the cycle, and he just has so much still going on. He's got a new book coming out. He's raised over $2 billion for Parkinson's research. It's just a joy to be able to say that, we're friends.
I don't think anyone could have expected it to have this staying power, have this phenomenal legacy, really, the whole trilogy, and even like the conversations about there being another film, and the fact that everyone is adamant that they don't want to do it, I think is so great, especially when that happens all the time nowadays. I hope we don't get another. As much as I love these films, I think they're perfect as they are. Leave them be. But how do you feel about it? Because, this is a 40th anniversary of the first film, but we're really celebrating the trilogy right now, which you are a part of.
Yeah, and part 4 is kind of the musical. It's a reimagining of the first one. But the fan club originally used to send out, back in the 90s, used to send out the Hill Valley Telegraph. It was the fan club's newsletter. And they would publish fan-written Part 4 concepts. There were fans who wrote scripts of Part 4. And I still have a bunch of them. I'm a file about that thick, and they're fun. They're great concepts. A lot of really imaginative, wonderful fans, and because the Bobs worked so hard and went through so many revisions. I got my script of Paradox out the other day. Paradox is about that thick with all the rainbow colors of the rewrites, and then I have another thick book of rewrites from Paradox. So they have basically 2 volumes that I'm sure fans like yourself would go nuts over seeing, because, like I said, there's one version of the scene in 2015 where George is in the ortholab because of his back going out during a game of squash. Or I think there's even one version where Marty's in the ortholab. They're trying to work all these different things. There was, you may know, one version of the script of the sequel where George and Lorraine are hippies. They go to the 60s, and there's unlimited imagination when you get into time travel, and then when you have characters that you adore, and the relationships that are loving, love, as we all hope, knows no bounds. And that's what the film celebrates. And the timeless love between George and Lorraine, and Doc and Marty, and Doc and Clara. There's room for it to go on. I've had actually kind of head-to-head butts with other famous celebrities over whether or not there will be a part 4, because bottom line, Universal owns the product, but both the Bobs have said over our dead body. But it is fun to see new generations discover the films, and I pinch myself that I'm a part of the trilogy. For all intents and purposes, I shouldn't be a part of it. Had Crispin not been so driven by money and control, or the Bobs so irritated and not patient with the negotiations, I would be probably doing something else. But I'm fortunate, and I count my blessings, that I'm on this podcast because of it. It's kind of cool. If you got another minute, something to share. This is deleted footage from the making of part 2. This is Sonny Berman, the late great Sonny Berman from the Berman Brothers, and Nancy Vasta gluing me in. Leah is being glued in. You see Kenny Myers, I think, or Marvin Westmore is back, and Mike Mills, the foreman from Beetlejuice, working on Leah. And wow. If all of us were working, as Tom was working and Mike was working, then they would bring in these legends of the makeup world. Zoltan and his wife, they got the Academy Award for the makeup effects on Mask. As I mentioned, Marvin Westmore of the famous Westmore family. It was really fantastic getting to know these hardworking makeup artists. So I would, if I needed to be on the set by 9 a.m., I'd be in the makeup chair by 4 a.m. because it took generally 4 hours to get into any of the 17, 47, or 77-year-old makeups for part 2 and part 3. I would get glued in for a couple hours, and then I'd get a quick break to go have a breakfast burrito, and then come back and get painted and wigged, and then into costume. And then here you can see that profile of the young George makeup.
Wow, that's crazy.
I heard Zemeckis say Leah for action. He had previously been saying Crispin. I was like, Bob, I'm Jeffrey.
Thank you so much for sharing this. An exclusive.
It wasn't, released as part of the making of part 2 documentary. And luckily, one of the crew on that was a friend of mine. He said, hey, you should have this. I said, thank you very much. I'll use it 25, 30 years down the road. And here we are.
Well, thank you again for sharing that. And as I said, is there anything you want to plug, Jeffrey?
Niagara Comic-Con, December 6th, I believe. We're talking right now about trying to get to the Twin Pines Mall meetup at La Puente Mall and maybe some of the other Back to the Future location tour events. Fingers crossed. Most of the other support members of the cast are going to be at Chiller Theater in New Jersey, which I've done in years past. Great show. Just, keep in touch. Backtothefuture.com on the events page has everything that anyone in the cast or the musical are up to.
They're fantastic for keeping people up to date with that stuff.
Yeah, Stephen Clark does a fantastic job. I think Universal basically is in charge now. I'm at Jeffrey J. Weissman on Instagram, and Jeff, Jeff Weissman on X or Twitter, and Jeffrey Weissman actor, my actor page on Facebook. The personal page is full up. I think I've got about 1,500 friend requests that I can't respond to because I'm at their max and have been for many years. So don't take it personally.
Well, thank you again for speaking to me, Jeffrey. Like I said, it's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Nick, thanks for having me on, and I'll see you in the future.